This is the Like-Minded Investors Real Estate Podcast, episode number 4. That podcast episode was so good. I cannot wait for people to listen to it.
I didn't even ask all my questions. I had questions about her
Me either.
because I had questions about her pod. I wanted to
Yep.
prop it up a little bit, but I looked at the clock on my laptop and I was like, she's getting tired, and I know she just had a full day, and we're gonna have her on again, and she's just incredible.
Well, guys, let's prop it up now because she has the Good Bones podcast, which is absolutely incredible. If you guys want to go and listen to that, even before you go and listen to this episode that we're about to show you, she just has so much great content, and I feel like she's down to earth. She tells it how it is, and yeah, I'm super excited for this episode. And then also like I said, if the listeners want to go and check out the Good Bones podcast that she has out, let go do it.
Yeah, Good Bones podcast with Bonnie. You can also check out Landlord Law School, or follow her on Instagram. We'll try to link everything in the show notes the best we can.
Yeah.
Bonnie is awesome. If you have any questions, DM her. She is amazing. She will get back to everybody. And I think it's a good lesson for everybody who wants to listen and learn a few things about both investing and the legal side. I mean, I think one of the biggest lessons out there that I think goes maybe understated a little bit is when you're building out your team, you need a lawyer, you need an accountant, you need a contractor, you need a real estate agent, an insurance broker, and so many other things. But one of the things that people I don't think say a lot is, to the best of your ability, get people that either invest themselves or work very well with investors. Having a lawyer that is a real estate lawyer that doesn't own real estate maybe isn't the best choice. And having an agent who doesn't invest in real estate, if you want to invest in real estate, maybe not the best choice, because maybe they're not taking you to the properties that would make the most sense for an investor. Maybe they don't have the network of people that have off-market deals for you. And I think that, Bonnie, being both a very successful investor with over 120 units, as well as a super successful lawyer, and as she described herself, a real estate entrepreneur, I think just speaks volumes to not only her practice and her career in this space, but out of the other 48 states, there has to be Bonnies out there that are equally as credible and awesome. And I think as investors, it's our job to search them out.
Exactly. So basically, after you listen to Bonnie's episode, if you can't find somebody that's she's licensed in Pennsylvania and I think New Jersey. So if you can't find someone in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, you need to find your own Bonnie in your own state. So we really hope that you enjoy this episode. All right. Thank you, Bonnie, for joining us. We are so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I've been looking forward to this so much. I'm sure Bill has too. Right, Bill?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess to get started, we kind of ask every guest just to give us a little bit of a recap of who you are, kind of how you got started in real estate, where you are, as far as, everything you're doing. Bonnie, you are doing amazing things. So just tell us kind of who you are and where you're at with real estate.
Sure. So I'm Bonnie Galam. I consider myself a real estate investor first, a real estate attorney second, and a real estate, I'll say, entrepreneur in many ways. I got started in real estate investing when I met my now husband back in law school. I went to law school thinking I was going to be a criminal prosecutor, actually was a criminal prosecutor for several years. And he was a real estate investor on the side. And what was on the side eventually became full-time for him. And I've always loved real estate. I was the kid who would take her Borders gift card and go buy house plans with it. That was me as a child. And I saw what he was doing, and it was a mixed bag. It was like, one, I'm obsessed because it's real estate, but B, I'm a lawyer and I'm a nervous Nelly, and I'm like, what the actual F are you doing? Like, we're going to lose everything. Like, I was that naysayer girlfriend in the room who's just like, can't we put this in a Roth or something? And eventually, I got on board. I was like, oh, this is actually the best thing ever. And that led to me opening my law firm a few years after I graduated from law school, because I just didn't like the way I was working with other lawyers. I was kind of doing things behind the scenes. For a few years, I couldn't really do it on the books as a government employee, but I was learning it. I was loving it. And I was like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to do it better than these old farts. And I'm going to do it my way. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been an adventure, a learning experience. I learned so much from my clients every day. Yeah, that's where I'm at. That's me. I'm Bonnie. I invest also by Burr method, largely in student housing in Philadelphia. I'm located just in the Jersey burbs outside of Philly, and we self-manage them. And I know that's probably where a lot of the conversation is going to go next.
So how many units then do you own now? Because so I know you said you Burr, but
yeah.
Like, how many units do you own now? And like, what percentage of them have you Burred?
We're at probably 120-ish.
Oh my goodness.
And we've Burred basically all of them. We have been, I guess, very fortunate to have started in real estate investing in Philly during a time of huge amount of appreciation. And so we've been able to kind of really benefit from that. Anyone who knows the Philly market, it kind of was somewhere that like no one wanted to touch 20 years ago, to this place that's like New York City South. And I say that with like disdain in my mouth. Like I have Philly pride. Like, we are not New York City South, but it's become basically a commuter city to New York in many ways. And it's just exploded. And we've been very fortunate to kind of had just reaped the benefit of investing at the right place at the right time. Some of it we have purchased, I guess not entirely, the Burr method, but we do try to buy distressed assets. Sometimes we'll buy them with, just a regular commercial loan, fix it up either with cash or with, some sort of construction product.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. I mean, gosh, 120 units. So Bill was kind of filling me in a little bit on your strategy. So he was saying that some of that is student housing, or is it all of it student housing?
It's probably like 80% student housing. We've got two commercial buildings. We've got a few rentals that I guess they could be student housing. They're just not, largely just due to location. But I'd say probably 80% of that is student housing. And that's kind of our sweet spot. We have properties kind of near Drexel and Temple, if you're familiar with the Philadelphia area. And it's been kind of a sweet spot, but it's also been really helpful from like a self-management standpoint, in that we kind of just have this little niche, and the type of problems that arise in those types of units and the types of rehab we do in those types of units, and even just the turnover expectations is something very predictable that we've found, and we like it.
I actually had questions about all of that, believe it or not. So I've also went to school in Philly, so familiar with the area. Know that there's the City Six, all that fun stuff, high amount of college students in the area. Yeah. I know what I was like in college and what I did to properties, and, getting into real estate, I certainly hope that college students wouldn't do that to properties that I may own in the future. How do you kind of navigate the the party scene, the turnover year to year or every couple of years? I know like factoring into numbers and all that stuff, but like, I guess my question is, how do you kind of predict it the best you can?
So some of it is just knowing like the nature of the beast is what it is. When it comes to turnover, we anticipate that every unit will turn over every year, and then we're pleasantly surprised when they don't. And then budgeting for that turnover and managing it in terms of like making sure we've got cleaners ready to go and contractors ready to go to literally clean up the disaster that some of these apartments turn into. Many of them, I will say, most of the time, it's not as bad as you would think. Like we don't really have anything big enough to be like a frat house. I think our biggest unit is like a 3-bedroom, and so that is big enough to do some damage, but not big enough to like throw a true banger. But then a lot of it comes down to like when we do the rehab, like what are we putting in those units? It's like something that can be destroyed. Either it's cheap enough that we don't care, or it's durable enough to withstand it. A lot of our properties are very old. If you're parts of it are actually under like historic preservation. They were built in like the turn of the century of the 1800s, and so they actually have, you know, great wood floors that, you know, are actually pretty durable, short of you spilling like PBR on it all day or something. But we've put down, LVP. We're doing granite. We're not doing laminate. We do the cheapest, cabinets, and we get as far out of them as we can. And the good thing, I think, also with student rentals is that the expectation of the tenants are pretty low. They're looking for something clean. They're looking for something convenient. They're looking for, maybe a washer and dryer, something like that, but they're not looking for like the Ritz-Carlton of features. And so that kind of helps balance out I think what some people could see as a detriment of like the high turnover, the heavy wear and tear that students can put on properties.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And my 21-year-old self feels personally attacked by that PPR comment. but just getting into more detail, I guess. So, speaking of convenience and students just wanting to have a place to live near campus, all that stuff. How do you kind of structure the rent? Is it like rent by room, or do you do like one contract, everybody signs, co-signers, parents, all that kind of fun stuff?
We do the one signed lease. Everybody's got co-signers on there. And everyone's kind of jointly and severally held liable for the lease. So if one person leaves, the rest of the group is on the hook for the lease, unless they find someone else. And we're usually pretty flexible because it's often not too hard. Roommates are often swapping out. And so even if we have someone who is staying on the lease, say in a 2 or 3 bedroom, it's not unusual for 1 or 2 of the bedrooms to turn over, even if one tenant is staying. And I know there's other student rental landlords who have found a lot of success doing it by the room. I think largely the fact that most of our units are like studio 1 or 2 bedroom units, it doesn't really lend to that. It's just too small of a space, and they're not too difficult to rent for that reason either. Usually you can find like 2 or 3 people who want to live together. When you're talking a 4, 5, 6 bedroom, there's definitely those properties around the universities. I could see that being a better fit.
So I have a question about that. So, I've heard a lot of, I don't know if I want to say companies, but when I was in college, it was kind of like sometimes they would designate like one student to be like the manager of kind of all of that. With your contracts, is it kind of just like, they're like, I know you just said that they were each responsible for it no matter what. So if one student doesn't pay, does that mean that the other students are responsible for that actual other students like non-payment? Is that kind of how it works with your contracts?
In theory, that would be how it works. Thankfully, we haven't run into that issue too often. I think the fact that there's co-signers and frankly, student loans kind of helping a lot of people pay for their student housing helps. We don't have a big, delinquency issue. But I think that where was I going with this? In terms of non-payment of rent with students, you can just really kind of vet them on the front end, but we've also found that we're pretty flexible. If someone's like, hey, I can't pay, or hey, I'm dropping out of school, or I'm transferring, or this or that, we really try to be flexible in terms of getting like a good sublet in there. We don't really try to hold people to the gun and say like, you're forced to be in here. It's just like, hey, let's work with each other as soon as possible. And that's really just been our approach to business across the board, not just with the student rentals. It's like, let's just all work with each other. Because as soon as someone comes in and is like, oh, I'm holding you to this and this and that, yeah, we let them know that. But the approach is, so let's work together to solve this issue, rather than let's, end up in court with each other.
I love that. I think that's so profound. I mean, just everybody wants to avoid courtroom. So I think it's good to be able to try to work things out before it gets to that.
Yeah, and I have found, I mean, we've evicted maybe like 2 people in the last 10 years. Like it's not something we
Wow.
try to do a lot. It's really when a tenant kind of puts us in the position where they're like, I'm not going to leave until like a sheriff's at my door. We really try to give people, like, you've got to the end of the month to leave. The month is on us, but you got to go. Like just that 1 month is often cheaper than the holding cost and the waiting cost of dealing with the sheriffs and the attorneys and all of that. And so personally, we found that just avoiding that whole process is frankly in everyone's best interest. I mean, people's housing is like sacred. I think for students, maybe a little bit less so because they probably have mom and dad to go back to, but not always. But when you think about, someone's housing and like the decision to evict them, I mean, it's something that is like a stain on their record forever. Every other landlord forever and ever is going to see that there. And so if they're just, a period of hardship, rather than, bring them down and bring me down and all of that, like, how can we just like part ways amicably and give you the space to sort it out?
I love that. Yeah. So how do you then like, I guess when I was in college, it's like kind of like, I wish that I could find, in a space like yours. Like, how do you actually find those student rentals, I guess? Like, how do you get them into your units and always have them? Like, do you find that it's easy to fill your vacancies?
It's usually pretty easy. I'd say the bigger the unit, the more difficult it is to rent. And I think that's just the nature of student rentals. It's just more people having to agree on it since we don't do rent by the room. But we do, I think, the same thing that a lot of regular landlords do. We, push it to like apartments.com, Zillow, which is, obviously shifting with the way that they allow promotion of rental units. We don't do Facebook or Craigslist, I don't think, but we just get it on like the apartment websites. And we used to have signage. I think we may have some signs on some old buildings. Those don't seem to bring in the best tenants, or the most qualified tenants. Because there's a lot of foot traffic in the area, but we also get a lot of referrals where, a tenant may be graduating or leaving and they're just like, hey, my friend wants to lease here. Or you kind of have that revolving door where like one person's leaving, the other one's staying, and they kind of just wash, rinse, and repeat. Referrals have been very nice. I can't say that we have like one of those houses. I don't know if it was this way when you guys went to college. I was in Greek life and there was always like that, like off-campus house where it was like perpetually being passed down through like a fraternity or a sorority. Like we're not that blessed in life to have that, but maybe it's a good thing because that house will probably take a beating. But I mean, people always have friends who are a little bit younger than them. And so there's always a handful each year that we can get kind of lined up very easily. Oh, just saying, let them go and get the turnover. Well, guess who gets a month's rent when you do the turnover? And so I like having that really tight control over our portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Now, circling back to how you market the properties, I guess, you had mentioned doing it online, word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. I was wondering if you actually had any kind of relationship with the university where you could go and say like, hey, could you guys post it on your website? Like, do those universities have a portal where students can go and look for properties? I know where I went to school, there was something like that, and some landlords were able to kind of post their listings there specific to the university.
Yeah, I know Drexel does. We don't participate in that. I think largely just because we haven't felt the need for it. Frankly, I don't know if Drexel takes a cut or like what the fee is to post. I remember back because I actually went to Drexel. It's funny when I met my husband, he's like, oh, I'm a landlord near Drexel. I was like, oh crap, are you my landlord? But he's not. So that was good. Kept the relationship going. But it was a lot of like those like more institutional landlords where it was like campus apartments or I forget the other big one that was around Drexel's campus, but it wasn't ever really like the small guys. I remember I found all my apartments on Craigslist, which I don't know, is that considered sketchy now?
I don't know. I've heard people have good experiences with Craigslist when it comes to hiring like contractors and subs. I don't know so much about housing, but I mean,
well, maybe I'm dating myself then.
I literally just out of my desk before you arrived, pulled out a sleeve of like CD-ROMs that I could burn music onto in my desk. I'm at my parents' house before I move into my flip, so dating myself too.
But I don't blame you. My parents just sold their house, and I had a Hello Kitty like binder of CDs that were like mixtapes. They're called like throwback jams with like 7 Z's. So I can't judge.
Did you listen to any of them? Were there any?
What am I gonna listen to? Where do I have a CD player to like listen to this stuff? But don't worry, I've got a throwback jams playlist on Spotify.
Okay.
There you go.
The house I'm purchasing, the one closet in one of the bedrooms literally was filled to the ceiling full of VCRs, like old like DVDs, CD players, everything. So if they leave them behind because they're basically useless, you can have one.
Oh, thanks. Just what I was missing.
So Bonnie, I guess one of another question that I have, and I'm sure like a lot of the listeners are going to want to know, you like, let's talk about your practice. Like you own, is it correct that you own your own practice now?
Yeah, I do. So I created my practice about just over 2.5 years ago at this point. We're going on 3 years. And I did that because, like I said, I didn't like the dynamic that we had with our other the lawyers who we were working with. It was obviously an expense. And so I was like, if we can bring this in-house, it made a lot of sense. And I really just kind of came at it from this approach of I'm an investor first and I'm an attorney second. And so I kind of had this mindset of like, for every legal solution, there's also a business decision that has to be made. And so I found, and I really struggled with working with a lot of lawyers who were like, this is the law, this is what you have to do. And like, yeah, there are laws and things you have to do. Don't get me wrong. But like when it comes to, decisions around, tenants or asset protection or whatever, like it just never really jived with me with what they were selling. Essentially, like that's what lawyers do, we sell services, and what they were selling just, it never sat well with me. And so I was like, I'm just going to sell, do it my way and see how it resonates with people. And it's been going really well. I love what I do. In many ways, it's kind of spun off to like the creation of Landlord Law School, and it's spun off to, this really fun podcast and meeting people like you guys on podcasts, and connecting with other local investors and learning about, just totally different exit strategies that I'm like, people do that. And, some of them I'm like, I won't touch with a 10-foot pole at my law firm. And some of them I love being a part of it now, like some of the creative finance stuff that investors do. And so it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So I guess like one of my other questions then too is like, I feel like there is this thing about LLCs. Like, what is your take? What is your take on LLCs? Like, I feel like people are like, oh, you need an LLC to, for asset protection. And then other people like, it doesn't matter. Kind of like, as a lawyer who has your own firm, kind of what is your take on LLCs and purchasing properties under them?
Sure. So my non-legal advice opinion is that LLCs are great. If you and your investing strategy can basically afford to invest through an LLC, then I think you should do it. I realize people who are house hacking, for example, like their financing wouldn't work in the event of, especially if they're doing like an FHA kind of conventional owner occupant mortgage, having the property owned by an LLC doesn't work. Granted, you can buy as an LLC and live in there, but you don't get a lot of like the tax benefits and things like that you would as an owner occupant. But I think LLCs are also kind of like presented as this, bulletproof iron shield thing. And I'm like, they're there to mitigate loss. That's really what it is. It's to contain a loss, whether it's someone from the outside, like in your personal life, trying to come after it, or something that happens based off the business activity in the LLC. It's contained. Think of it as like a little bubble and things are over there. Granted, you have to use the LLC properly. And that's a big problem I see with not just investors, but just businesses across the board, is if you don't run your business like a business, then you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have the asset protection that comes with it if you're not acting like the business you need to be. And so a lot of people don't do that. And then the LLC can often be useless. The other thing to think about at LLC is, like I mentioned, is that it's there to mitigate loss. It doesn't do anything to stop you from being sued in the first place. No lawyer has ever like saw an LLC and is like, man, it's not worth the effort. an LLC. Like that's not the reality. And doing things like equity stripping and doing all these convoluted LLCs and trusts and all of that stuff, like, is there maybe an incremental amount of asset protection through that? Yeah. Is there also an astronomical amount of legal fees and accounting fees and things like that? Yeah. I mean, just today on Instagram, and it's the middle of July. I'm not sure when this is gonna go live, but like I literally posted, I was like, do you need asset protection from your asset protection? Because it can just get insane. And a lot of people, they get into this overkill, or worse, they get this fear, like this paralysis where they're like, I can't start investing until I figure all of this out. And it doesn't have to be that difficult, and it doesn't have to be that expensive. And what I often, and my approach is when I talk with investors about it, is what do other businesses do? Not like real estate and businesses. Like, what does the pizza shop do? What does Amazon do? What does, every other business who you interact with in your life do? Well, I can tell you what they don't do. They don't like form a Wyoming LLC and then put it in a land trust and they're structured in type of an LLC. Like, that's just not what they do. They create a business entity to separate it out and separate those activities, and they get the right insurances in place, but then they also get the right documents in place, and they run a tight ship in terms of their systems and processes. They get good contracts out for the people who they work with, and then they cross their fingers. There's always going to be some amount of risk, and if you're going into real estate investing hoping to just stick your head in the sand and pretend that nothing ever happens, then that's not the reality. That's not how this industry works.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that goes for all businesses. I think if you want to be, the person at the top, the owner, the entrepreneur, there are always going to be risks in terms of somebody trying to come after you. Whether that comes to fruition or not is, to be
Right. I mean, it's
determined.
America.
But
You can sue anybody for anything. And so what you want, and what I, encourage my clients to have, and the reason why I created Landlord Law School is because I want you to have the evidence. I want you to win on your actions. And so nothing, no LLC will shut something down faster than someone's signature on the dotted line saying otherwise. And so if we can have that and have like a robust arsenal of things to protect you and making sure you've got the right insurances in place, I can't like stress that enough from an asset protection standpoint, is that a lot of investors like, great, I've got a homeowner's policy and now I've got insurance in place. Like, you may need multiple levels of insurance. You may need a general liability policy. You may need an umbrella policy. You may need all sorts of things depending on the type of investing that you're doing. And I mean, I'm talking about this as a burr investor, but there's different insurances that like a wholesaler should have in place or a flipper should have in place. Like, you need to make sure you've got that stuff in place, because that's really what an attorney who's going to sue you is going to look for. What's the policy payout and how do I get the max? That's what they're looking for.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Like, I didn't even have this as a question, but like, I didn't even realize it never even came to mind that you need different policies for different things. My husband and I, we've house hacked, we've burred, we've flipped. I have never thought about the fact that you need to have like these different things in place for the different types of real estate investing that you're doing. So
yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Go call your insurance broker.
Me neither. And after this, I might have a question or two.
Yes. Okay.
But in terms of full disclosure, I guess for the podcast, I probably should be transparent. I am purchasing a flip and I have homeowners insurance and was considering getting like a blanket umbrella policy to kind of start my investing and scaling from there in terms of just generally starting.
Yeah, I mean, I love umbrella policies. I think everyone should have one. I think they are some of the best bang for your asset protection buck you can get out there. I mean, for a few $100 a year to get like $1 million put on top of you, that's just great. I mean, I think it's one of those like adulting things that people don't like talk about. It's like, you need to do your eye cream, you need to get your umbrella policy. And so it's just one of those things, like, as we grow up, like whether you're a real estate investor or not, but especially if you're a real estate investor, like your net worth is going to increase. And so your exposure to loss there also increases. Like, what you stand to lose increases as you have more things. And so I love umbrella policies.
Maybe I'm better off than I thought then. But I totally agree. I think they're great. And I think, real estate or not, as you grow and you hopefully invest wisely and your assets grow, whether it be real estate or stocks or bonds or crypto or whatever your heart desires, at some point you're going to accumulate enough assets where maybe somebody will come after you, and protecting yourself is always the number one.
The only caveat I give people with umbrella policies is that there's exceptions. You know how that's insurance's favorite thing to do, is to like write you a policy and then find a reason why they don't have to provide coverage under it. And so a big one that often comes up with personal umbrella policies is business activities. And so if you're flipping and you have your personal umbrella policy and something goes wrong, that umbrella policy may not kick in if it needed to. You may want to have a separate business type policy in place. And so that's why it's really like getting in touch with your insurance broker, laying it out, like, this is everything I'm doing. And so what do I need to do? Like, and these are my insurances. What do I need in place? Is this sufficient? Should I be bumping this up? Do I need a different type of coverage for the other activities? Is muy importante.
So I guess this is kind of
I'm like past my bedtime, guys. We're just going off the rails.
I know. Bonnie, believe me, I was telling Bill earlier, I'm like, he might need to carry the podcast tonight because this is past my bedtime.
Me and you, girl.
Yeah. So one of my things too, I guess, is, I mean, I don't like, I know that you cannot like answer like 100% like legal things on this podcast, but
I will not.
So, I guess what would your best advice be for somebody who is, because my husband and I, we are doing flips. We're doing a live-in burr. We also have another property that it's a complete investment burr. Like, do you suggest getting for the types of people that are doing like all these different things, like different LLCs, or just doing the umbrella policy? Like, kind of like, what's your take on people that are doing a bunch of different investment strategies?
Yeah, I think it's cleanest if you can, isolate them out into different LLCs, if applicable. Like a live-in burr, for example, depending on how you acquired that, like that may be something you never put into an LLC. I'm not sure what your end game of that property is, but the other things, like if you're a wholesaler and you own rental properties, for example, would you ever want a wholesale sale deal gone south to screw up or touch a rental property? Heck no. Separate those two from each other. You want to be contracting under the one when you're doing the one thing, and the other when you do the other thing. Because wholesalers, for example, they never really take possession of an asset. They don't have a lot to lose, especially if they're very quickly passing the money through. And same thing with flipping. Flipping is also a different type of tax when you flip a property versus when you have rental income. And so a flips are sometimes the LLCs that people actually do make an S corp election for because it's tax beneficial, whereas doing that on a rental property may not make sense. Another big thing that people talk about is, for example, self-managing or property managers. If you're going to do that, then some people will create their own LLC and kind of filter everything through the property management LLC down to the other ones. The big thing you also have to think about is, who am I doing this for? Because I realize that as real estate investors, as you start kind of putting yourself out there and growing, people are always calling in and asking favors. Can you help me with, this renovation? Can you show this property for me or whatever? And once you start doing things for people beyond yourself, you're now kind of exposing yourself to a new risk pool. And I think that's also a good time to start thinking about carving things off, because a lot of times people will be flippers and then they'll say, oh, a friend wants me to now contract something in his house. And like, maybe you have your GC license, because I know a lot of flippers do, to pull their own permits and whatnot, but now you're doing it for someone else. And you may say like, you know what, I don't want to mix those two together. And so thinking about when you're stepping beyond yourself, same thing with us, for example, like my husband does our own property management, but we also property manage for a few close friends of ours. And for that, like we have a separate company, like it's just not worth the risk of meddling on anything else.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I love that answer, especially because also my husband's a contractor. So it's like, we have a separate LLC for that. So it's like, I feel like we're kind of on the right track. And I know I've talked to you before about separating out a couple of the other things. So yeah, I feel like I'm using this as like my own, not therapy session, but I just love chatting with you.
No
Bill,
worries.
what other questions do you have for Bonnie?
Yeah, I actually had one. So one of my favorite things about you, Bonnie, is your Instagram stories. I love
Yes.
like there are very few people that I religiously watch and wait for it to kind of go through it all with the awkward pause and
I am
everything.
flattered.
Agreed.
mean,
I am totally on board with this. Go ahead, Bill.
yeah, so for any listener who doesn't follow Bonnie, please do, because it's in my opinion worth its weight in gold. That being said, you have your own legal practice, and obviously we want to be able to promote your legal practice and everything that you do. That's amazing. And in some form or fashion, I feel like you have probably figured out the balance between dangling the metaphorical carrot on Instagram and leaving something for people to call you and hire you and things like that. So my question was how did you figure that out? Is there some sort of metaphorical carrot and things like that?
Honestly, it really kind of started when I would just see things that bothered me, and I just be like, I don't want anyone else to go through this. And it hasn't been with any real intention to get clients. I think I always just thought it was better content, and if people enjoyed it, then that's for the better for me. I do get quite a few clients every month through Instagram, which is both a pleasure and a surprise in many ways. But I do think that what I try to focus on is just kind of little lessons. I think I'll have something go wrong in a contract for a client, or someone will call me with a particular question a few times in a week, and I'm like, you know what, I think it's worth kind of diving deep into what this means. Or the moratorium, I had some thoughts on that. And so I can't say there's been a lot of intention behind it, and for better or for worse. But I just see it as an easy way for me to provide some value, some education, without people having to call the lawyer and be like, hey, what's this thing? And so if you follow along with me for weeks or months or whatever, you'll probably get a lot of things where you're like, oh, I'm going to put that in my back pocket and know I have that information for later. Yeah. So that's my jam. I love Instagram. I love hanging out there. People are always surprised when I respond back to a DM. They're like, oh my God, thank you. But I'm like, who do you think I clearly don't have anyone managing my social media. That is just me and my either boredom or rage. Those are usually the two things that will bring me to Instagram.
I love it. I mean, like I said, those are must watch usually. And I agree. Weeks, months, whatever. I definitely know that I have learned a lot from them. I'll put it like that.
Well, thanks for saying that.
Same
I'm
here.
glad they don't just go off into internet no man's land.
No, and I know when we first formally met in person,
Yeah,
that you said you know where to find me. DM me on Instagram if you have any legal questions. So and here we are on a podcast, which is I guess a little
I
different.
know,
But
it's a lot of fun, and I think people are questioning that, because I'm like, my email inbox is managed by my paralegal. She triages that before I even see anything. So if you want to quickly get in front of me, I'm always peeking at the gram. I'm addicted. I love Instagram. Because I'm such an avid learner myself that I have those people that I follow, and I'm like, what can I take from you, and what can I learn from you, or how can I be inspired by you? And so I'm there a lot.
I am as well. Oh, go ahead, Kier.
So I guess just kind of playing off that, what have you seen have been some of the most common questions that you get from Instagram?
So I get a ton of the LLC questions.
Yeah.
That's probably number one is what is going on with these LLCs. The other thing I probably get the most is how would you handle this tenant situation? And I'm only licensed in 2 states. And so I kind of say this is how I've dealt with things in the past, but eviction rules, for example, are very different across the country. This is something that is governed by state. There's no kind of real overarching federal law that I can be like, hey, go look at this. But a lot of people will talk to me about that, or they just they laugh, or they'll agree to some of my rants that I've done about things. I've got very strong opinions on land trusts. I've got a lot of strong opinions on other asset protection lawyers. And I would say that, a lot of people are just kind of like, sometimes they just want to pick my brain on things, which is fine. I just have to be careful that it doesn't like delve into, attorney client relationships. And I'm pretty good at saying like, look, I think this is something that we need to formally sit down and talk about, or you should talk to a lawyer in your state or your CPA or whatever the case may be. I'm very conscious of that, because one of the things I really do dislike about social media is that I think there's a lot of people giving unsolicited and uneducated legal advice, tax advice, investment advice without really any qualification. And I think it's really, really dangerous. I saw legal templates through my program, but there's a lot of people who sell other legal templates and they've landed on my desk and they're a hot mess. And so just, having that, the quickest and cheapest and fastest way is not always the smart or the best way to do things, whether it's with legal stuff or really anything in real estate. And so it's worth having that sense of skepticism about the content that you're consuming, and what those people's qualifications are, because there's a lot of like internet gurus out there who will promise you the moon but really have nothing to back that up.
So I have a question. So you brought up attorney-client privilege, and I guess spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched the show, you can click the 15 or 30-second button down below a couple times. But Breaking Bad, have you seen it, Bonnie?
Yes.
Okay. Saul Goodman says, "Put $1 in my pocket, and I'll be your lawyer." Is that legally like factual?
I guess if someone just says like you're hired, in theory, yeah. My malpractice insurance needs a lot more than that. My malpractice insurance wants to have, a written retainer agreement in place. And personally, I require a lot more than $1 to get started with me. But yeah, I think probably like in a court of law, like because I've had even like my parents recently sold their house, and like midway through the conversation, granted, he like actually like was my client at that point. He's like, we're switching from like Bonnie and dad to Bonnie and client, and what I have to tell you is privileged. And so yeah, it can be as simple as like, I think the dollar was there because it's a sign of like contractual consideration.
Mhm.
But realistically, like if you DM me and are like, here's $1, I'm going to Venmo it to you, that doesn't count. You hear that, like malpractice gods? I do not count that.
Yeah. So for anybody out there, don't DM Bonnie, don't Venmo her $1. It needs to be way more.
Yes.
And maybe a DocuSign or something along with it.
Yes, there's definitely a DocuSign that comes in. My malpractice requires that. And I think that's much to like the chagrin that so many people call them. Like, I've just got one quick legal question. I'm like, I really get that. But like lawyers are paid for their brains. Like I don't have like a thing to like sell you. Like I don't have like a toothbrush that it's like, here we can have an exchange, or like a hairdresser who's like actively performing a service. Like when you hire a lawyer, kind of like with a CPA and stuff, like you're hiring someone for their brain and their knowledge. And so it's a bit amorphous, and I feel funny about it. Like I'm the worst salesperson in the world, and I think people like that they're just like, I'm just so bad at it that they're like, I trust you. But it's but $1 is important, because even when you think about $1, think about like $1 deed, for example. If people are deeding something to an LLC, is a perfect example for $1. The reason you can't do it for $0, because in theory, like no one's really passing $1 from themselves to like this LLC, is to show that there's consideration, that there's some item of value that is being exchanged that kind of binds the contract and puts it in place, whether it's an oral contract or a written contract. And yes, in theory, I think an attorney-client agreement can be found and created through an oral agreement and that quick exchange of consideration of $1. There's your lawyer lesson of the day.
That was worth its weight in gold to me. Thank you. I've been waiting way too long for that answer. And
well, I'm happy to have provided it.
I wasn't going to hire a lawyer to ask it.
Oh God, no. I don't even like lawyers that much.
So I do have another question. So I think it came up a couple times and about evictions and the moratorium and things like that. And I know we've been through unprecedented times, to say the least, the last 18 months or so. And being that you're a lawyer and probably have a lot of situations that have come up over the last 18 months related to evictions, I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on it, if you don't mind, without going too political, because just like anything, there's, two sides to every story. And,
Yeah. And I guess I'll talk about, the perspective that I've seen it, like even through like the lens of my clients. And it's been a mixed bag. I think everyone's perception of the moratorium when it first went into effect was like, yeah, this makes sense. Like the world is coming to an end. Like this is not what we need to be focusing on. I think we all also thought like we saw people 2 weeks and we'll say like, hey guys, see you in 2 weeks, like we'll go quarantine and this will be it. And that very much was not the case. I don't think like our politicians knew exactly what this was and how to deal with it. I don't think scientists knew what it was and how to deal with it. And so everyone was kind of just doing their best. I think the problem is that what they did from the outset is still what is in place today in many places. Like there has not been an evolution of like kind of releasing the valve, at least here, I'll say in like New Jersey. I'm licensed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. But in Pennsylvania, for example, you can evict for reasons basically other than non-payment of rent. Whereas in New Jersey, like that ship is just like totally closed. You cannot evict. I've heard rumors of people actually evicting people for like other bases, but like no one's willing to like name names or name attorneys or name judges. And so I don't believe it until I hear it. And I kind of wish that there was a little bit more flexibility. I know in other parts of the country that I think things are back to closer to normal in many ways. There's still the federal moratorium that's in place till the end of the month, but that only covered a portion of rental properties anyway. The hardship that I have and I've seen with a lot of my clients is that they truly have people who are taking advantage of it, or there are situations where it's a dangerous or unsafe or unhealthy situation, and they really have no remedy. I mean, they're getting in trouble with the local municipalities. I had a client who got arrested for an illegal lockout. Like it was getting to be a real mess, and these aren't bad actors. They're trying to figure it out, and it's a mess, and there's no real recourse. Another issue I have with it is that it's in many ways it feels like the entire brunt of the pandemic has fallen on the shoulders of really small landlords. There's not a bill that you can in theory kind of skip except for your rent right now. And I realize that housing is special. It is not like your credit card bill. It's not even like going to the grocery store. It is where you bathe, it is where your children fall asleep, it's where you eat. It's sacred and it should be treated differently. But I also don't think it needed to be an all or nothing. I think people kind of put this stopgap measure in place last year, which made sense. But I think we needed to revisit it sooner than we have in many places.
Oh gosh, I got tingles from that response, Bonnie. I 100% agree. Bill, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's a very delicate situation. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to look at it from both
Yeah.
ends, and there's really no uniform answer. You have big institutional owners, you have small landlords, you have mortgage companies that employ thousands and thousands of people, and then you have the tenants who are paying rent. And the unfortunate truth is that somebody's going to get hurt in that, and the answer is the question is who.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think it should be the big banks. I think Main Street bailed out Wall Street a decade ago, and I think it's the big banks' turn. I really wish that there would have been more pressure for banks, especially on the commercial end, to kind of eat it a little bit during this time. And I'm really curious to kind of see what this like trickle down like legislation that is coming. I know in Philadelphia, they're putting out some legislation that you can't deny housing based off of delinquencies during COVID, whether it's, credit score blips or even evictions that didn't result in a judgment or a sheriff coming out. There's also some legislation that's floating around your ability to sue for owed rent from the pandemic. And so a lot of landlords are kind of like they're up a creek without a paddle. They have no remedy now, and they're also kind of being denied any sort of future remedy. I'd be curious to see obviously how this stuff holds up from a constitutional standpoint. I know in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania there were some kind of like start and stop constitutional lawsuits that were brought saying like this is unconstitutional what you're doing to the landlords. And I think everyone kind of felt like we'd be through it by now, like that this would just be not an issue, and it still is, and it's still the same laws on the books.
So, did you have any issues with your student housing when it came to the moratorium or whatever?
Very early on in the pandemic, we had a few people reach out to us and say like, hey, like I'm either like losing my job or I'm, the school shut down and I need to move home and my work study's done, or like whatever the case may be. I can't afford the place anymore. And we kind of made the judgment call. We also had someone who was like a restaurant server, and we knew that. And like she's like, until unemployment comes in, like I literally can't work if I wanted to. My job has been like eliminated from the economy. And we very quickly kind of told them, like, if you want to leave, go ahead. Like our thought was, let's get them out and see if we can get someone new in very quickly rather than like drag this out. And we did that. They were super, one, grateful, but two, helpful. And like they would record videos of their apartment and got it up. And we got it up, they sent it to us, and worked with us in terms of showings and things like that, which was really delicate. I mean, it still is really delicate for many people doing showings when you're living there. And we just got new tenants in, and thankfully it worked out really well. I think last year, I mean, just inventory's just been low across the board, and so I think that's been helpful in keeping things occupied. But yeah, we dealt with it very early on. I want to say it was like April, May last year. We had maybe 5 or so units that we needed to kind of quickly sort them out.
So that's not too bad, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, no, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, we pulled a line of credit that we had. Like we just have one that like we never withdraw from. It's like in case of emergency, break the glass type of line of credit. And we remembered that back in, I think it was 2008, the banks froze the line of credits. Like you could not pull yours. And so when we saw like the writing on the wall, we very quickly withdrew like the whole line of credit, saying like, if we're going to need to float this business for I don't know how long, like I want the money to do it, because the university shut down. We didn't know if they were going to open in the fall. We thought that, in May, we're like, if this is still going on in September, like we're screwed. Looking back, like that's kind of laughable, but thank goodness. And I think a lot of people just didn't want to move. So we had very low turnover last year. A lot of people stayed where they were. And it thankfully worked out pretty well.
Nice. Well, Bill, do you have any other questions? I have a couple more, but like I said, I don't want to take over the podcast.
No, it's fine. I do have one. Speaking of the low inventory and everything, and I know we kind of all relatively invest within the same hour or two radius, let's call it.
Yep.
Do you have any current or recent projects that you've started or are in the process of, Bonnie, and is it due to the market being so crazy?
No, I don't. We don't have anything currently in the market. We're thinking about doing a 1031 on one of our properties, but we haven't acquired anything really. Actually, we required one like small commercial building. That's my office that I'm like office hacking right now. But we really haven't purchased anything in the last year. We've put a lot of offers out there. We haven't gotten anything. But it's also just been kind of like a crazy year. Like I had a baby like in December of 2019. And so like the pandemic was like kind of on the crux of that. And then it was just kind of a crazy time for me professionally. I will admit I am the property hunter. My husband is the property manager. And so like when real estate exploded, it was, very good for my law firm, but it also kind of took me out of the day-to-day of being a real estate investor. I miss it though. I'm ready to like kind of swing that pendulum back over.
That's awesome. And I guess follow-up question. So there is a stigma, and I don't know if it's true or not, that lawyers work like a bajillion hours a day, like almost 24/7, right? And you own like 120 plus properties. You have your own law firm. You do landlord law school, and you have and everything else. How do you, being a mom, like how do you manage all of that?
Yes.
I have a lot of help, I think, is part of it. I would not be like, I'm Wonder Woman. That's absolutely not the case. But I think it's two things. I have a lot of help. My husband is a true team player in every sense of the word. We also have, like, I have staff at my law firm. It's not just on me. I'm probably overstaffed based off of my revenue, but that's what allows me to kind of like balance everything out. I also have very firm boundaries. Like when it's time for me to leave, like, so be it, it's time for me to leave. And sometimes I lose like clients that way. Like if I only have like 3 or 4 slots to take a new client each day, and those are full or they're booked with other calls or whatever, and I can't talk to that person till the next day. And if they're not willing to wait, then like, that's fine. I'm not staying till 6 o'clock to finish all of that.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt. I love that, Bonnie. Like that is something I need to work on. Sorry, continue. I'm so proud.
And it's not something that like happened immediately. It's something that, I mean, that pendulum was off for a good period of time where I was like, I felt like I could work all the time. And I'm sure as, you know, entrepreneurs, which I consider all real estate investors to be entrepreneurs, like there is this pressure that there's always more that you can do. And that's the truth. There is always more that I can do. In every respect, but there's also always more time. And so I, triage religiously. I, tackle what needs to be tackled immediately. And then the rest of the day gets filled in. I don't know if you've heard of like the 3 big blocks, where it's like, if you can tackle 3 things today, do that. And then everything else is kind of bonus. And when you have, a heavy transactional practice where you have like dozens of closings a month, that there's sometimes more than 3 big things, but, they're not always 3 things that like have to be done by me, for example. And so having like paralegals or an associate to be able to do them is key. So yeah, those are the 2 things: hire too many people and just have those firm boundaries. Like people will call me at 8 p.m. They will text me. I do not look at my email after 5 p.m. I do not look at it before 9 a.m. I just don't.
I think that's an incredibly healthy habit. I mean, I know in my day job a couple jobs ago, I was very much the guy who would log on and reply to emails at 9 p.m. And at some point I just realized, who am I doing this for? They're paying me a salary, and as great and as the salary is and as thankful as I am to have a job and all of that, I mean, I have a life too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things where you just kind of have to like realize, I mean, I could sit there and triage emails literally 24/7. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve my clients. And I think it's just like a false expectation that I put on myself for a very long time that I think no one else really expects of me. And I've kind of even heard that from clients in many ways, where I was like, oh yeah, I could turn this stuff around in like 1 business day or 2 business days. And then other attorneys are like, yeah, I'll get that to you in like 2 weeks. So I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And I mean, certain things I think in real estate are very time sensitive. And the value I can provide to a client is not just delivering the work, but delivering it fast. Particularly like off market deals, getting them under contract. Like I realize that's extraordinarily time sensitive. But other stuff, it's like LLCs is a great example. Does someone want an LLC today? If they've waited 5 years, they could probably wait 5 days.
Yeah. So you said you were licensed in 2 states. I'm assuming, is it New Jersey and Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess, Bill and I both invest in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So kind of what are, I guess, like, what have been like your biggest, oh gosh, I don't know how to word it without being like mean, but like, like how, like, have people been like, oh, well, this lawyer told me to do this, but I feel like it's completely wrong. Like, what have been like some of your most like biggest problems, I guess, when it comes to other lawyers that told these people to do something and then they come to you and you're like, no, that is absolutely not right?
So I don't know that I've ever had that, but I have often had it where I have, a different approach to things. One of the things that I don't like that attorneys do, though, is they commoditize their services. There's LegalZoom out there that can commoditize a contract, for example. What our value is to clients is to counsel them and inform them and help them make decisions on their own. And I really think that that is my greatest value as an attorney, is to say, look, this is what this other attorney is proposing. This is what this means, and this is how it would play out. This is another option, and this is what it means, and this it would play out. Like which sits better with you? Which fits your goals and your values better? Because sometimes things just fit people differently. The one I get all the time is like, well, so and so said I should have one property per LLC, and that's better asset protection. I'm like, yeah, that's also better asset protection. It's also a great way to bankroll your CPA for like the rest of your life. And so let's just talk about like how this plays out. And, is there a middle ground? Are you comfortable with middle ground? Some people are just nervous Nellies and they're like, no, what matters the most to me is having one property per LLC. And that's fine. Their risk tolerance is different about mine. It's not my money. It's not my properties. It's not about me and my ego and what I think is right. It's about explaining the differences about all of those different options and letting you choose for yourself. And I think that that's where a lot of lawyers kind of have the wrong approach, is that they have an approach. They have like, this is how it should be done, when there is no way it has to be done. If there was, then we would write a book and lawyers wouldn't exist. We would just be like, this is how you do it. And so, yeah, that's my gripe.
I think it's great. And I think once you get into maybe a certain net worth, a certain entrepreneurial spirit with business, or just general comfortability, I think certain careers, you do pay that money for somebody's brain, like you had said earlier. I think lawyers is one. I think accountants are another on some level, and I think financial advisors are as well on some level. I mean, those are the three big ones that I can think of. But I know for me personally, those, like, I worked in financial services in the tech side, and I learned very early on that, to your point, no one can predict the stock market. And if there was, there would be a book and it would tell you to invest in XYZ. I know a lot of people, say VTSAX or die, or VTI or die, and that's your personal preference.
Yeah.
Not financial advice, but but I mean, I think, everybody is different. Personal finance is different. Personal, legal, and liability and risk is personal.
Yeah, it is. And another, a great example of this also is leases. People are like, can I have a lease template? I'm like, well, what are you doing with the lease? Because I think other lawyers will just be like, yeah, here's a lease. Or they see that Bigger Pocket sells a lease or a contract, and they're like, that's it. That is the contract. That is the lease. And I'm like, no, like there's a lot of variation that you can have to these documents that fit your business, fit your properties, fit your expectations and goals. The example I love to give with student rentals is that these drunk mofos get locked out in the middle of the night. And so we have like a penalty for after hours lockouts versus during the day lockouts, because it's something that happens not infrequently. It's hugely inconvenient. And we just kind of know, like, this is our target market and these are things that are going to screw up. Same thing with like a single family lease versus a multifamily lease. They shouldn't look the same. And if someone's just pooping you out a lease and being like, here you go, it's not doing you the full service it could.
Let me just interject here really quickly, because so funny we're talking about that, Bonnie. My husband was just telling me the other day, he's like, all right, on our next single family, we need to put, so we visited our single family property that we have on, I think it was like Friday, and and they are not weeding, they are not doing, like, they're mowing, but they're not doing like the weed whacking, they're not they're not, you know what I mean? And so he's like, in our next lease, we need to have it where they have to weed whack, they have to weed, they have to do these things. And I'm like, yeah, these are all the things that we're learning as we go along. So Yeah, he took me there and I'm like, oh my God, the property looks so bad. Like, I can't believe that she's not weed whacking and that she's not weeding, but it's not on her lease. You know what I mean? Like, it just says she has to mow. Like, that is it.
Yeah.
And that's what she's
And that's
doing.
one of those things where you learn better and you do
Yep.
it. And one of the things I encourage my students really in landlord law school to do, and any of my clients at my firm, is to do like a periodic audit of that stuff. Keep a running list of things that went well, and more importantly, things that did not go well, and say at the end of the year or quarterly, be like, all right, how can we fix this and so it doesn't happen again? Maybe it means talking to your insurance broker about something. Maybe it means updating your lease. Maybe it means reevaluating how your intake process looks for vetting new tenants. But at least that way you have this process in place to say all of this stuff is living. Like, there is no such thing as like a done SOP or a done lease. Like, this is all evolving because your business is evolving, you're learning, and that's not a bad thing. It's just the nature of being an entrepreneur.
Oh my gosh. Like, I just want to like clap my hands. You are amazing. Like, I'm so glad we had you on. Bill, do you have any final questions for Bonnie?
No, just want to thank Bonnie for coming on and spending the time with us. I think this was super valuable to us, but I hope equally as valuable to the listeners as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So Bonnie, where can people reach out to you? And let's, real quick, maybe you could talk about a little about your landlord law school, because I know we had Lauren and Kyle on our first episode, I think, and they took your landlord law school and have amazing things to say about it. So if you want to talk real quick about that too, that'd be cool.
Sure. So if you didn't get it earlier, the best place to find me is on Instagram, at Bonnie Galam ESQ. That is my fave place to hang out, or on my podcast, Good Bones Real Estate Investing. Looking forward to having you guys on there soon. So landlord law school came into fruition after I started my law firm. And my motto at the time was be proactive, not reactive. And so I was previously a litigator. I was no longer taking litigation. I just wanted to do the transactional work, help real estate investors, like literally be proactive, not reactive. And I'm still getting these calls of things being screwed up and like all these ways that they were losing money, dealing with contractors, dealing with tenants, dealing with their business partners. And I'm like, they're still calling me too late in the game. These investors, like, I want to help them, but they're still calling me too late in the game. But I also got the perspective, because I was in their shoes as well, that I'm like, I don't want to call a lawyer and have this huge retainer and pay $400 an hour every time I've got this quick call. Like, I'm not going to do it. And so if that's the expectation, to be proactive and not reactive, then it's a losing battle. Like, that is not a game that I would play, let alone any other real estate investor. And so I'm like, how can I teach investors what I know, but also then provide them with a resource that they can use over and over again without being billed $400 an hour, and give them some of my favorite templates that I've used in my business for my clients. So that way they have this arsenal, and it's kind of like a business in a box in a way. And it teaches you how to legally create your business, legally run your business, legally grow your investing business, and kind of gives you, there's all sorts, I have like an asset protection audit in there. It is like my baby, and I love landlord law school. I think it's like, if you could just create like one course in law school that would teach you about being a real estate investor without having to take the student loan to get it, that's landlord law school.
Oh, I love it. I told you it's going to be like my next investment is going to be landlord law school. So
I can't wait to have you inside.
Yeah. Woohoo. So cause Lauren, she just like tells me all the good things about it. So, well, it was awesome having you on the podcast. Bill and I are so happy that you came on tonight. Even though now it's almost 10 p.m. our time.
Your editor's gonna have some fun with this one.
Yeah, right.
Who's that?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. We loved having you on and just talking all things real estate, and we'll hopefully have you on again at some point.
Yes.
I would love that.
New recurring guest, Bonnie.
Yes.
Monthly non-legal legal advice from your favorite lawyer.
All right. Well, we will talk to you later, Bonnie. Thanks.
Sounds good. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.